Half of us live with one. They are the most popular pets in the world. So popular that we have a cat problem. There are too many of them, and they cause a lot of trouble. So are they pets or pests? Or both? And have we lost sight of their positive and redeeming qualities? Cats are the new plague, the serial killers who prowl our neighbourhoods. They're worse than that. Toxic zombie death machines is closer to the mark. But this is also a love story, obviously.
I'm Jude, and I've lived here for several decades in the north end of Dunedin.
The north end of Dunedin. The student quarter. The last day of exams. And then moving out and heading home for summer. With the help of Mum and Dad. Getting rid of stuff they no longer need. The colony of cats that live in this street get some peace and quiet.
A lot of students have, over the years, have invited kittens to live with them, or acquired kittens and failed to de-sex them, and the students have left and the cats have remained and formed a fairly sizable, not feral but wild community. Is a major problem, but we're sort of working to get it under control.
We have more than 1 million cats as pets. Nearly 200,000 strays are living around us, but they're unowned. And maybe 5 million, maybe less, maybe more feral or wild cats living beyond any human contact. The cat problem is, of course, our problem. We have not controlled their numbers, and there are now too many cats. So many they are toxic to themselves. A problem most evident when Jude serves dinner. Jude feeds more than 12 cats every night in her garden. In other parts of New Zealand, more sophisticated methods are used to control the 20,000 colonies that plague this city, and with some success. Back in Dunedin,
There's serious cat carer comes each night and feeds one colony across the street, and I feed the ones that hang around here, and to a lesser extent there's someone at the bottom of the street also looks after the cats which arrive on his property.
The feeding of cat colonies actually results in higher densities of cats that would normally occur in areas. Cat colonies is not just a conservation issue, it's an animal welfare issue for those cat colonies as well. Many of the animals are starving. There's high incidences of infectious diseases like the feline immunodeficiency virus amongst them. Cat bite abscesses are a regular thing.
when you have sick cats breeding, you get sick kittens. And that is what happens every Christmas in Jude's garden. Three litters of kittens were born at Jude's, and of those first 12 kittens, only 2 were healthy enough to survive.
I've found that the survival rate amongst kittens isn't high. They show signs of illness or not thriving. I don't really do much about it.
Obviously, desexing is the answer.
When they've been desexed, they then put them back into their environment, but they have an identifying clip on the left ear, which indicates that they are desexed.
We've got to do something more than we're currently doing with those colonies. We have to come up with some solution.
So we need to solve the problem of their numbers and make some tough choices, so we have fewer cats. But unfortunately, that is not the only problem with them. Now, we are not talking about the flesh-eating Dawn of the Dead zombies or the much-promised global zombie apocalypse. However, the parasite in cat poo changes the way infected animals behave. And that parasite has a name, and it is called toxoplasmosis.
So toxoplasmosis is an organism that's proper name is Toxoplasma gondii. It's a protozoan, it's a single-celled organism, so it's a bit like an amoeba. It lives normally inside the intestines of cats. And it's an ancient parasite of cats, so cats all over the world are infected with Toxoplasma gondii. And every cat that's infected excretes what you can think of as eggs of Toxoplasma gondii in the cat's poo, feces. And then what normally happens is a rat or a mouse or a bird or some other animal eating seeds or something else, maybe grass, by mistake eats the eggs, the oocysts of Toxoplasma gondii, and now the Toxoplasma gondii is in the rat or the mouse or the bird. And the toxoplasma inside the brain of rats and mice changes their behavior so that the rats and mice are much less, if at all, afraid of cats.
And not just backyard birds, native ones as well.
We have diagnosed the toxoplasma that cats carry in native birds, where we have quite a few cases now where we have that infection in the brain of native birds that's resulted in the death of the bird. We don't have any knowledge of whether it affects the behaviour of the native birds in the same way that it does the rats and rodents.
Because we let cats wander, cat poo washes into the rivers where the parasite can be eaten by wildlife.
The cat feces that run off into the rivers, that flows down into the coastal sediments, and those parasites accumulate in that coastal area. And so animals that are feeding in the near coastal environment are going to be exposed to these parasites of cats.
Not just the common wildlife, but also the critically endangered species as well.
It's also being found, surprisingly, in coastal marine wildlife. The Hector's dolphins and the Maui's dolphins have been diagnosed with toxoplasma. And these parasites don't belong in a dolphin, obviously, and when they get in there, they have nowhere to go, so they end up in the brain and they cause severe damage, and they have caused deaths of some of our native dolphins as well.
And unfortunately, we are not immune from the effects of this parasite.
We can be like rats or mice or birds, and we can eat lettuce or carrots or other stuff out of the garden that's been contaminated with cat poo, and we can get infected with Toxoplasma gondii. And by the time we're 30 or 40, something like 20 or 30% of us have been infected.
And the parasite can affect an increase in the dopamine in our brains, just like it does in rats and mice.
The toxoplasma in our brain does seem to change our behaviour slightly. And so lots of studies around the world have shown that the behaviour of people who are infected with Toxoplasma gondii is slightly different from the behaviour of people who are not infected with Toxoplasma gondii.
An overproduction of dopamine can cause chemical imbalances in the brain function. And this dopamine increase is implicated in a range of illnesses.
Schizophrenia is much more likely to happen to people who are infected with Toxoplasma gondii than people who are not infected with Toxoplasma gondii. So it changes our behaviour as well.
And what is happening isn't a mystery.
The fact that Toxoplasma produces dopamine in the brain of rats and mice and changes their behaviour provides you with an explanation for a possible way that Toxoplasma somehow might make some people more likely to get schizophrenia.
If you would like to prevent the looming zombie apocalypse, it may be as simple as getting your furry zombie maker to poo in a box and put it in your rubbish bag for collection. It is now late March. The students have settled back into their routines, and at Jude's house, the 5th litter of kittens has arrived at the end of summer. The estimated number of feral cats in New Zealand ranges from 2.5 million to 14 million. They are not as destructive as the rats that preceded them, but upon their introduction hunted birds, lizards and insects, some to extinction. And the problem isn't confined to feral cats in the wild. Your little death machine who slips out the cat door is doing exactly the same thing.
Personally, I'm not too worried about bird slaughter because I've found with the cats around here, if you feed them well enough and they lie around in the sun and they can't be bothered. Native birds even nest here.
But Jude's local experience is not indicative of the wider problem of urban wildlife surviving with cats.
So the Wild Base Hospital is a facility that's been running for about 15 years, and we treat exclusively native wildlife. So mostly birds, but also reptiles, bats, occasionally marine mammals as well come to us. We take injured and ill animals from all over New Zealand. Threatened species in particular are flown to us from both North Island, the South Island, and sometimes the offshore islands as well. And common species from around the local area, including of the native birds and also some of the native reptiles as well. What we see in the Wild Base Hospital is only a small proportion of what cats are taking in the urban environment, because we're only seeing the ones that survive to make it to us. I'd be very hesitant to try and say the numbers of patients, like the 30 or so cases that we see from our local area, are any reflection as to the number of wildlife that urban cats take in our area. There is an emotional toll to dealing with the injured wildlife that come through that affect all of my staff and myself over time. And one of the things we struggle with is compassion fatigue, where you're giving so much of yourself into these patients time and time again that eventually it starts to take its toll on you. But we have ways of dealing with that, and one of them is to celebrate the ones that do really well, and to celebrate the successes and try not to dwell too much on the ones that don't make it. And you'll see an example a bit later on of a cuckoo cat attack that didn't make it. And we'll do a post-mortem, we'll try and learn out as much as we can from that animal, but other than that, we won't try and dwell on it too much.
Most native species haven't been making it since Captain Cook arrived and released the first cats on the mainland 240 years ago. Their first tentative steps were recorded by the ship's diarist.
One of the ship's cats left in the morning and caused a great disturbance amongst the fluttering birds in the wood.
Whalers and sealers left cats on the outlying islands. After European settlement, cats wreaked havoc on the inshore islands as well. Advertisements appeared wanting to buy 500 cats to release in the hill country to deal with the rabbit problem. The cats weren't as effective as hoped. In the 1940s, feral cats were officially declared pests.
The way that I view the not just the cats but all of the introduced mammals that we brought in is this is a war, but it's a war in its final stages in between the native fauna and the introduced mammals. The introduced mammals won a long time ago, and all we are doing is trying to preserve the little remnant of the natives that is left.
After 12 years of living on the street, this winter Fanny was found a forever home. But rehoming is not an option for every stray cat in the country.
And so we've got to do something more than we're currently doing with those colonies. We have to come up with some solution. And unfortunately, the only solution I can see at the moment is humanely putting those animals to sleep.
This love story is not going to have a happy ending. We've been together for 12,000 years, and now we need to talk about our relationship. We can't go on like this. Things need to change. One of the reasons we love you so much is your wildness, but that is also the root of the problem. And it's a problem we've caused, and we need to fix it for you. The good news is there are plenty of solutions, and lots of people who love you want to help. We're not doing this because we hate you. We're doing this because we love you, and because you deserve better.
So all I can do is to feed them and de-sex them and at least stabilise the problem.
And that's the choice that the New Zealand public has to face. We can either have cats or we can have urban wildlife, but we can't have both.